DNA is very good for determining ancestry. However, DNA is not good for determining dates. It's not good for trying to date or to determine dates of human migrations or when a DNA type came into the Americas, for example. There have been a number of studies that have shown how DNA dating is unreliable because it assumes a mutation rate that does not fit data that's been found about mutation rates. And there are other reasons too that the dating is unreliable. I'll get into that in just a second, but first let's talk about what DNA dating is and how it's used. Okay, so DNA dating is based on and relies on the full theory of evolution. So it takes as the assumption that humans evolved from a common ancestor with chimpanzees over millions of years, and that any Eve or a common human female for the mitochondrial DNA type, any Eve would have been at least 100,000 years ago. So taking those assumed long dates, what they do is they figure out, okay, so here we are here, here's the projected or idea of the mutation that to get from there to here. And they take that number of mutations over that projected time period, and they say, okay, well then, this is on average about how long it takes for each mutational step along the way. And when they do this, they get very long dates, a great number of generations between the mutational steps because of the large time frames that they're looking at. Once they have those estimated mutational dates derived from that theory of evolution of having evolved over millions of years, they then take a look at ancestral groups, so population groups in the past, say the population groups that came over to the Americas, and they look at the number of mutational steps between them and current Native Americans or the current population. And they say, okay, there's this number of mutational steps in between there and here. If we take that same estimated mutation rate from the theory of evolution, this would then mean that those migrations would have been X number of thousand years ago. There are a lot of problems with this. Obviously, the first problem is that it relies on the theory of evolution, which is highly contested, both as to whether humans evolved from a common ancestor with chimpanzees and the time frames that are projected and assumed. There's no assumption, it's all based on random mutations and how it would have happened with random mutations. There's no idea of a creator or an intelligent design guiding the evolution or anything to that effect. So you have all of these assumptions of what happened in the past, and then you also have assumptions about the dates and how long that happened. And what we find is that when tests have been done to try to determine how often mutations actually do happen, that totally does not match with the estimated time frames that have been proposed for the theory of evolution that has been used for DNA dating. Now, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and show this for you. Okay, so as discussed, with the theory of evolution derived DNA dating, they use these estimated mutation rates to create what they call a molecular clock, and based on the average time expected between mutations. And because of the large dates that they are assuming and estimating, they're estimating that these mutations don't happen except for like 100 or 200 or more generations of people. Now, how do you test that? Well, obviously that's too much time, and you can't reliably get the old. You're very limited on what you can directly test. But one thing that you can do is, even if you can't test, say, a human line over 100 or 1,000 generations, what you can do is, across a population, you can test across 1 or 2 generations, across, say, 1,000 people, and you can see how often mutations actually happen. When they have done these types of population level and pedigree tests to see, okay, what is the actual mutation rates instead of what has just been assumed or inferred from the theory of evolution, what they found is that the direct testing produces mutation rates that are many times faster than the rates that they have been assuming and using for the DNA dating using this molecular clock. Here's an example of a peer-reviewed scientific article talking about this, and he just goes back and he notes that the population level and pedigree data, so the actual data, produces remarkably high, much higher estimates of mutation rate, which he says strongly contrasts with what's been inferred or assumed. So this is the data versus what's been assumed and inferred in the genetic studies for the DNA dating. So those that are using DNA dating to say, oh, haplogroup X, that's the Middle Eastern DNA type found in Native Americans. They say, oh, DNA dating says that that came to the Americas 16,000 years ago. Well, that's not true. It's completely unreliable to try to use a inferred mutation rate to project that date is extremely unreliable, because the data shows that mutation rates happen much faster than that. And here are a couple of additional peer-reviewed studies that showed this. This one in the Science magazine, this other one in the American Journal of Human Genetics. And this one found the actual data was 7 times faster than the assumed rate used in the molecular clock. This one and their data found mutation rates 10 times faster than what was assumed and used in the molecular clock. So if you use these actual mutation rates and data, then the time frames that you would be looking at for migrations would be 1/7 or 1/10 as long. So 16,000 years then becomes 2,000 some years, or 16,000 years would become 1,600 years using that kind of mechanism with corrected mutation rates. Now, these were in the mitochondrial DNA side. The same thing has also been more recently found, not much more recent, but yeah, on the Y chromosome patrilineal side too. And this was another one. This was in 2015, where when you look in the supplemental text for it, the number of mutations found was 10 times higher than what has been assumed and used for DNA dating. So each of these comes to the same point, which is that when DNA dating has been relied upon or used to say that migrations happened a super long time ago, or long before, the migrations to the Americas happened long before Book of Mormon timeframes, you have to understand and realize that those dates are based on time frames in a theory of evolution that assumes evolving from a common ancestor with chimpanzees over millions of years, assumes that any Eve would have been at least 100,000 years ago. So these are assuming extremely long time frames, and that the time frames that they're using do not fit the data when they have been able to test how often mutation rates occur actually in tested populations. Now, I'm going to address one other thing too, which is that even if you did keep the slow mutation rate, okay, so even if the evolutionary slow mutation rate were correct, it would still be highly unreliable and wrong to use it for dating. And I'm going to show you why. And to do this, I'm going to make it more simple, I'm going to use a die. So this is a 6-sided die. All right. Now, like mutations, the rolling of a die is random. So the odds or likelihood of rolling a 1 on a 6-sided die is 1/6. So on average, you would expect to roll a 1 1/6 of the time. Just like with mutations, on average, even if you assume the evolutionary assumed rate, say that it's 1 mutation every 100 generations, right? That would be like rolling a 1 in 100. So each generation, there's 1 in 100 chance of having a new mutation. Okay, so it's a little bit like a die. Okay, so with a 6-sided die, it's 1/6 of a chance you roll a 1. Now, who thinks that if I roll the die 6 times, that means I will have 1, 1, and only 1, 1. Can't be 0 ones, can't be 2 ones, can't be 3 ones. It's going to have to be 1, 1. Well, that's ridiculous. Your familiarity with rolling a die, you know that if you roll the die only 6 times, you might get 0, you might get 1, you might get 2, you might get 3. You might get unlucky and roll a 1 all 6 times. Now, over time, as you roll the die tens and hundreds and thousands of times, you know that it'll eventually be about 1/6 of the time that there'll be a 1, because it's a 1/6 chance. But you don't know that it's going to be exactly 1 out of every 6 rolls. If you rolled this 60 times, how confident are you that you're going to have rolled exactly 10? The 1 exactly 10 times. You know that you can't be confident. Over time, you know it'll kind of gather around that 1 in 6 chance, but you know from experience that it's not going to be exact because it's random. Well, it's the same thing. So here's a 20-sided die. All right, I don't have, let's see, yeah, so I don't have a 100-sided die with me. But let's assume that you had a 100-sided die. So it's sort of like the evolutionary theory of the chance of a mutation, right, on the key areas that they're looking at. So let's assume you had a 100-sided die. What they do is when they are looking at the current population versus the ancestral population, they're saying, okay, looks like we got a mutation. We rolled the 1 5 times. Okay, so they got on a 100-sided die, they've rolled a 1 5 times, meaning that there's 5 mutations between the current population and the ancestral population. So what DNA dating is, it's like saying that because we've rolled a 1 5 times, that means that it's been rolled 500 times total, because that's the average. Well, it should be obvious that that's really poor logic, because you don't know that. You don't know that. You could get lucky and roll a 1 multiple times in your first 10 rolls, or you could be unlucky and never roll a 1. You just don't know. So here's an example. This was in my Face of a Nephite book. I did an example with rolling a 6-sided die. And what this does is it shows that, so here is the number of die rolls as I went along. and the colors represent the different numbers that were rolled. And so on the first roll, I got a 2. On the second roll, I got a 4. So there had been 1 2 and 1 4. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. And what you can see here, and this is just a first example that I did to just create an example for the book. But so what you can see is for this example, in the first 12 rolls, I still had not rolled number 1. Now, eventually, as you get over time, in here, as I've rolled the die 60 times, or 120 times, or 300 times, it does end up, it's not exactly 1/6 each, but it does kind of get, as you get to these larger numbers, you get the law of large numbers, and things start to coalesce around their averages. It starts to be about 1/6 each. But that only happens when you're dealing with a lot of events. When you're talking about population groups and trying to use DNA dating and population genetics to determine when a population, say, came to the Americas, you're not dealing with large numbers of mutations. And so it is unreliable, it is incorrect, and a fool's errand to try to say that, okay, this is X number of 1,000 years ago because of the number of mutations we see. It's just not reliable. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that the use of the dice helps make it clear for people who might not be familiar with it, but to just understand what's going on there. So I'll go ahead and stop share there. Okay, so when I have talked about DNA evidence for Native Americans, and in particular for the Middle Eastern DNA type haplogroup X that came into the Americas, one of the frequent responses that will be received is to say that, oh, but DNA dating says that haplogroup X came into the Americas 16,000 years ago. I hope from this video it'll become clear and you can understand why that's not a reliable way to look at dating for human migrations. They're using that kind of DNA dating only out of absence of something better to rely on, because it's not a reliable way to determine dates. Because mutations are random, and to use them in that way is unreliable and inappropriate. And not only that, like I said earlier, the actual data that's been received shows mutation rates that are many times faster than what have been assumed. So there is no reliable DNA dating for these haplogroups to come into the Americas. That's not reliable dating. So there's no reliable evidence, again, pointing to show that haplogroup X was too long ago or can't apply to the Book of Mormon. All right, I hope that's clear. Let me know if you have any thoughts or comments, and if you like the material. Again, I encourage you to hit the like and subscribe and notification button so that we can get more information to you. Thanks.